Okay.
Hey, you don't follow hip hop, do you, that much, Akhilesh, right?
No, no,
Okay.
not at all.
There's this song. I'll tell you the name of the song. It's by the Notorious B.I.G. It's called I think it's the sentiment that Matthew Stafford's feeling. It's called "I'm going back to Cali." Hey, he's going back to Cali.
He is going back to Cali. I mean, he's really not. He's already been there. What do you mean going back to Cali? It's not like he left and then came back.
Hey, man, you never know. I mean, Matthew Stafford's a Texas guy at heart. I mean, he probably went to
That's true.
coach. Yeah,
That's
never
true.
know.
Who knows?
Yeah.
That was a good one.
Who's in the house of blues? I'm going back to Cali. I'm going back to Cali. I'm going back to Cali. I'm going back to Cali.
What's going on, guys? Back again with another episode of the Winning Browns podcast. It has been a tight schedule for us over the last few days. I mean, obviously, this is one of the most jam-packed times in the NFL off-season schedule, being with the NFL Combine, the NFL free agency starting in a few weeks. Obviously, we got the draft in a little more than a month and a half.
Hmm.
Obviously, because the New Orleans Saints took forever to hire a coach. Kellen Moore finally has put together his coaching staff. We'll get a video to you guys on that shortly, outside of these podcast episodes. But we got a lot to talk about today, specifically with NFL free agency, and we got a little bit of fun for you guys coming up. But today we're going to start off with some big moves that have happened over the last few days, even before free agency began. It was Tuesday and Wednesday just went crazy in the NFL. We're talking about trades galore. We're talking about trade requests. We're talking about players getting cut, etc. I think the biggest names that we can start off with, obviously, All Pro Joe Tooney. I think, if I'm not mistaken, now three-time NFL, no, four-time NFL champion,
Hmm.
twice with the Patriots and twice with the Chiefs. Now gets traded over to the Chicago Bears, who are quickly adding on to what is now becoming a really, really good offensive line. They
Yeah.
also traded for Jonah Jackson recently too. So, Akhilesh, what are your thoughts on the Joe Tooney trade?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the Joe Tooney trade was probably the best trade that the Lions could have done from an offensive line standpoint, including the offseason standpoint. I think they got probably one of the best guards in the league. They got one of the most experienced veterans, a four-time champion. He's worked with probably two of the top five coaches in NFL history, with the likes of Andy Reid and Bill Belichick, and he's done exemplary at both. Um, when we really look at the Eagles' pass rush in that Super Bowl, the one slight disadvantage that they had was going up against Joe Tooney, and I think personally Joe Tooney had probably the best offensive lineman in that Super Bowl. So that goes to say what an offensive lineman he is, to be able to at least try better than what anybody else did on that offensive line against the monstrous Eagles. I think when you look at the Bears, we talked about it last season. The offensive line for the Bears wasn't exactly the worst, right? It wasn't the greatest, but it wasn't the worst. The problem was the fact that Caleb Williams just wasn't able to be that professional quarterback who stays in the pockets and
Right.
waits to get the ball out. Rather, he just keeps running around like a baby, right? So I think in that case, that's why Joe Tooney as a guard is just going to be so much more influential for a guy like Caleb Williams, an experienced veteran. I think another thing that I saw of the Joe Tooney trade was it's more of Ben Johnson telling the world, I haven't changed one bit. This is what I'm gonna do, and be
Right.
ready for it." Right?
He
He is
loves
gonna
his
be the old school
guards.
type. Yeah, I mean, I think with let's see how the run game goes. What type of running backs they bring in? We don't know. This off season does have some levity for the running back position, but we'll see what they can do over the off season. But I think the Joe Tooney trade was the best out of all of them. Coming on as to other trades, we have also seen. lot of cuttings, especially from the Jacksonville Jaguars, a team that I didn't expect to be on that leash of cutting in as many players. But they've cut ties with tight end Evan Ingram. They've cut Christian Kirk, who's also been sent off to now the Houston Texans. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, as far as the Texans, I think it's a good move. As far as he's a great deep threat, one of the better deep threats in the league a few years ago. Kind of fallen off a little. He's dealt with injuries in the past, but I think that um, it's I think it's a great move as far as a slot option for the Texans who can really stretch the field, add another weapon for CJ Stroud. I'm always for giving a quarterback more receivers. As far as the Jaguars, I understand it. Their wide receiver room was very jam-packed with a lot of receivers who were good but not great and overpaid. We talk
Mm-hmm.
about Gabe Davis. He had been a guy who had been widely rumored to be cut at this year. Then ended up going with Christian Kirk, who we
Mm,
talked about a few years ago when he got paid at previously. We talked about that being one of the worst contracts uh, given out that offseason. Um, Now you kind of start fresh for the Jaguars, who certainly now look like they're rebuilding and retooling around Trevor Lawrence, um,
yeah.
taking away an Evan Ingram. I'm not as big on the Evan Ingram cut. I think that he could have used a tight end like Evan Ingram. Evan Ingram
Mm-hmm.
being a modern day type receiving threat and being still pretty young. I think he's only about 27 or 28 years old, even though he's
Right.
played in the league for a very long time now. And he was Trevor Lawrence's favorite weapon for a good portion of the last couple of years. Um, so I understand it though. I know Liam Cohen wants to bring in his guys. He wants to really just start fresh, and I think it's a good way for the Jaguars to do so. They already got a bona fide number one star at the receiver position, Brian Thomas. You know, we talked about in the last mock draft about maybe they go and get a Travis Hunter if he's available. But we'll see. The Jaguars are now open with a lot more very interesting moves, and I can't wait to see what they do. But as far as other teams go, Washington has made quite a few moves. They have cut one of their longtime franchise players. That would be none other than defense tackle Jonathan Allen. For me, I don't think that was as surprising given the fact that obviously they are overloaded at that position. Fedarian Mathis got cut, but they still have Johnny Newton. They still have
Mm-hmm.
Deron Payne, who's really good. I think they brought back Tim Settle this year too, who has always been a great rotational defense tackle.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but then they also went and traded for Debo Samuel, one of my favorite players in the league. Uh, Kind of heartbroken as a Niners fan, but I think it was time for us to let him go. As far as Washington, I think of all teams, Washington with Cliff Kingsbury's offense and how much he likes to get those gadget type receivers who can make plays, yard after catch, screen plays. I think Debo Samuel can do a lot of things within that offensive system for the Washington Commanders.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about the Debo trade, I think it's to date right now, as of right now, I in the current moment, I think the Debo trade is one of the best trades that we've seen over this offseason particularly. You look at Debo, his skill set, what he's best at. I personally think Debo is overrated, but when you look at his overall, ability to play off the ball, kind of play anywhere on the field, now, Cliff Kingsbury, although he likes it, he hasn't been extremely successful in using these gadget players in the right way. So
Right.
we'll see how it goes. But I think for a guy like Jaden Daniels, just a quick inside slot receiver that just catches the ball and makes the play after the catch, I think Debo Samuel is the perfect fit for that. Jonathan Allen, I was surprised because Jonathan Allen is one of the best interior defensive linemen in the league. So that's why I was surprised. You look at the way he attacks the ball. Statistically, also he's pretty good. Obviously, it's not what it was 2 years ago or a year ago. The season was a bit of a fall off, but
He did get injured though. That was part of it.
yeah, but I did feel like personally, maybe age was a factor into it, but I did feel like he could have gone on 2 more seasons and been pretty strong at it. I now when it comes to Commanders, they also re-signed Bobby Wagner. Again, a veteran, a class veteran who knows the game better than most people. Um, just an, I don't think I think he's won a championship if I'm not wrong with Seahawks
Yes.
once, but a guy who's just an experienced veteran knows the game better than most people. I think it's a fantastic signing again. Another, when we look at other trades, you can also take a look at the Los Angeles Chargers, who have released Joey Bosa. As I mentioned in the previous episode, I did expect this to happen. I am upset in the sense that Joey Bosa was probably one of the most integral parts to the defensive scheme that uh, the Mighty Miner defense had employed on the entire NFL. But when you look at the way Joey Bosa has played what we need right now, I think it is the right decision to move on. I think Joe Ortiz and Jim Harbaugh, that was a tough decision for them because, obviously Jim Harbaugh has been one of the biggest fans of Joey Bosa, but I think we're going to see a lot of new edge rushers that's going to come into this team. Khalil Mack is also on free agency, and so is Joey Bosa. So we'll see how that goes. Another interesting trade for the Chicago Bears. They acquire another offensive lineman out of, I
Jonah
think, if I'm not
Jackson.
wrong, from the Rams.
Yes.
It would be Jonah Jackson, again for another 2025 draft pick. I think again just a fantastic trade there as well. Jonah Jackson, not talked about enough, I feel personally, but fantastic offensive lineman. Um, he's pretty smart also. I would say more than his athletic ability. I would say his IQ is what gets him to be that type of offensive guard that's just extremely talented. Another guy that's initially from Detroit got traded to the Rams and has had a much better success with the Los Angeles Rams.
Yeah, well,
Um,
I mean the interesting thing, I think I like the move on both parts. I talked about this in the previous episode that I expected Jonah Jackson to be moved on at some point. He was more expensive. He was older than pretty much all of the other Rams players. He was not as good as Kevin Dotson per se. A lot of people, I not this is not me, but a lot of other people questioned the move when it got signed originally. A lot of people thought he had been overpaid. This was a guy who had gotten better over the years with the Lions. Um, and, Ben Johnson had been accustomed to him, obviously helping him develop those final couple years with Detroit.
mhm.
But at the end of the day, it just came down to the fact that he was the odd man out for that team. Dotson had recently signed an extension and has shown to be one of the best guards in the league. Steve Avila is young. He's going to be in his third year next year and is shown to be one of the better underrated guards in the league. And Bu Limmer, a center who I was a huge fan of coming out of the draft, outplayed even my expectations. And played well replacing Jonah Jackson in that center position. Really had no mistakes, just moved Avila to where he was more of a fit at guard. So I think it's a more seamless transition for the Rams to have those three guys. And I think being that Jackson was the more expensive contract, it made sense for them to move on. And he gets, reclaimed to coach that is very knows him very well and kind of made him one of the best guards in the league. And I think he can get back to that type of level. Main problem with him was just the fact that he had injuries, but I do think that Jonah Jackson. I think this was a good trade for both sides. Now, speaking of trades, we're going to talk about one trade request that happened. Which would be none other than the Seahawks. They released Tyler Lockett, and on the same day, saw DK Metcalf request a trade out of Seattle. Akhilesh, what are your thoughts on that? Any places that you think DK Metcalf might go to?
Yeah, I mean, I think from DK's standpoint, I think it kind of makes sense. You look at the fact that as a receiver, we talk about DK Metcalf, his sheer size, strength, the physical ability, but at the same time, when I look at DK Metcalf, you look at his numbers, it hasn't been anything exemplary. All right, you look at 900 yards, 700 yards, I think 1,300, 2 seasons he had around 1,100 plus yards. He's don't get me wrong, he's a great receiver. He's a threat for any offense to have. But I'm just saying in the sense that I don't know if the Seahawks are going in that direction. I think that's why he's wanted a trade request. You look at the fact that they released their offensive coordinator after having one of the best offensive seasons they've had. As a whole franchise, Geno Smith obviously had one of his best seasons. Although his interception and touchdown ratio was higher,
Right.
but still a great season overall. They fired that offensive coordinator. Now, I think from DK's standpoint, you're saying I've been here for 6, 7 years, right? I haven't really gone anywhere. We made the playoffs a couple times here and there, but we really haven't gotten anywhere. Maybe it's time for me to move. I think that's why he's put the trade request down. In terms of teams that I think he'll go to, a couple of teams that strike me are uh, the Steelers number one. I think he would. I think going back to Russell Wilson might be an idea that he wants to entertain. Just obviously the Steelers need another receiver. You already have George Pickens, quite a big receiver that's fast. You have DK Metcalf, not as quick, but as just as powerful and strong. You could use him in the run game really well. Um, Another team that I think he would fit. Bias is there, but I think really the Chargers. I really do. You look at the Chargers. You look at the fact that Justin Herbert, when he was at his best, was when he had Keenan Allen, when he had Mike Williams, a big receiver who can get those acrobatic type catches, make the plays downfield deep. You look at DK Metcalf, again, a great run blocker as well, very physical on the line, a Jim Harbaugh type guy. He could be that kind of Julio Jones, rather. Sorry, Julio Jones that Matt Ryan, and he could be that for Justin Herbert. Maybe get him offensively to be a little bit more of a juggernaut type of offense. Although I also do have my you know, doubts as to Greg Roman, because Greg Roman is, a bit more the traditionalistic, if you will, of an offense. But I do feel still that DK Metcalf would sign with the Chargers because he knows there's a winning tradition there
Right.
and that eventually they will get a Super Bowl. So I think it would be the Chargers, the Steelers. If there is one other team, it might come as a bit of a shocker, but I would say the Miami Dolphins.
Ooh.
It's probably not what people are thinking, but I would say that in the sense that you look at the fact that Tyreek Hill might leave, honestly, or might not play with the intention of being there. You look at the fact that Jalen Waddle is regressing as a receiver. You have Jonnu Smith. Why not add one other receiver to the mix that's just gonna be that juggernaut that you don't know who's gonna come? It's kind of like the MVS for the Chiefs was, in the sense that MVS when it counts, he's going to make those big plays. And I think DK Metcalf is that reliable.
Right.
So he might go to the Dolphins as well. Again, an offensive genius with the likes of Mike McDonald. Or no, Mike, some stupid Mike. So I think that's the way it could go. These are the three teams that I see him going to. But obviously, I think any team should be open to going after him. I think he's just that talented. Um, of a guy. Speaking of the trade requests and bunking people, right? One other trade request that I thought was gonna go but didn't happen. Zach Bond and both Saquon Barkley decided to re-sign with the Philadelphia Eagles. I thought Zach Bond was leaving. Unfortunately not. Damn. But he's gonna stay. Um, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, it's not much to think about, but what are your thoughts?
I mean, the Eagles made sure that they're contending for another couple years. I mean, Zach Bond, I didn't, if I was Howie Roseman, right? Granted, I'm not Howie Roseman, and there's a reason why Howie Roseman is one of the best GMs of all time. But I would not have signed him for the 3 year extension simply but he's going to be 29 at the beginning of next season. He's relatively old. This was kind of a one out type season for him, and I don't know that he would have been worth that type of money long term. Personally, I would have given him closer to a 1 or 2 year deal just with his age range. But after the season that he had, being a finals for Defensive Player of the Year, who can blame him? I mean, that was the type of
Yeah.
deal that he was looking for. There's probably no way that the Eagles could have retained him had they given him 1 or 2 years. As far as Saquon Barkley, same thing goes. I mean, I'm not the biggest guy when it comes to, you know, uh, extending a running back into his early 30s with major injury concerns in the past, but Saquon Barkley deserves it. I mean, he's the guy
Yeah.
who came off 2,000 yards. He's the guy who I feel changed a little bit of the perception of running backs. Um, Granted, he is playing on a team with one of the best offensive lines and one of the best run schemes in the league. But there's a reason why this man was making similar stats even with the New York Giants, who have a god awful, horrid offensive line.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that, you know, Saquon Barkley, he's done enough to at least warrant himself making sure that he is there for the at least short term, long term, so to speak, meaning
Hmm.
at least for another 3 years while the Eagles find a successor to him. And the Eagles will. I mean, they're great at making lesser running backs play better than they are. Miles Sanders had a career year with Nick Sirianni's offense. A lot of people talk about Kyle Shanahan's offense and how running backs can easily get 1,000 yards. Not enough people talk about how, Nick Sirianni's offense, being with multiple different offensive coordinators, has been able to have the same type of success with different running backs.
Yeah,
And I think that Saquon Barkley being one of the best in the league, he deserves the same type of credit that a guy like Christian McCaffrey got with the Niners and
yeah.
that type of extension. And I'm not mad at it whatsoever, but I do think there should be kept an eye on just because of the age, but not in any short term time because this is an Eagles team that's still loaded as hell.
Yeah.
But I think it's a good transition to move on as far as the Eagles talking about the upcoming free agency because the Eagles really don't have a lot of things that they have to take care of, but they do have a
Hmm.
few free agents that are going to be on the market as well as a lot of different other players. And I think it's a good place to start as far as some of the best free agency fits. Akilesh, do you have one in mind to start off with um, as far as a player that you think would fit well with a specific team or anything like that?
I'm not gonna lie. Um, I haven't really been thinking about it enough. From a free agency standpoint, I think there are a lot of players that are gonna go on free agency this season. Um, but I don't know if there's any player that I'm like, oh my God, perfect fit, perfect fit. I can't say that because when you look at it, right, when you look at the players that highlight this class, right, you look at guys like Sam Darnold, Josh Sweat, Ronnie Stanley, Milton Williams. You look at those guys to highlight, right, this free agency, and I just don't see those guys as like, wow, they're gonna really fit for one exact team. I
Right.
think they fit for multiple teams. But if we're going off of I think for me, when you look at this free agency, you look at the biggest wild card, the guy who's going to be um, the biggest advantage, for any particular team. I think for me it would be Josh Sweat, right? You look at what he's been able to do in the Super Bowl, especially. He is 28 years old, granted, but you give him 6 years or you give him 5 years, 3 years, and he can make terror anywhere he's gonna go, right? So I think for me, Josh Sweat would perfectly fit in a system that um, needs to have that type of edge rusher to solidify the defense. So I would be thinking teams like the Miami Dolphins might want to go for him in Josh Sweat. Maybe not the perfect defensive system, but a team like that would want to go for Josh Sweat. Um, Another team that, I'm probably going to just say Chargers for every single free agency. I'm not going to lie because that's how our offseason seems to be going. We have some of the largest cap space in the NFL right now. We have just an ability to go after anybody. Now, with the release of both Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack, edge is something that we need a lot of help on. And in the draft, us being at 22, now will we trade up? We don't know. Right, I'll be honest, we don't know. But at the same time, other than Abdul Carter, Mike Green, I'm not seeing any standout edge rushers by any means, right? For draft purposes. So that's why I think honestly, Josh Sweat may be the guy that the Chargers, and I think he would fit best. You look at what Josh Sweat does; he completely dominates the offensive line. He has extreme pressure packages. He's extremely talented with his hands, big, huge guy as well for an edge rusher by any means. And I think you also look at the fact that when you look at the Miami defense, you have two huge defensive linemen inside that are going to attract a lot of pressure. We
Right.
saw how much success he had with the Eagles in doing so. So I think Josh Sweat, I think, would be the biggest trade personally to me, and I think he should go to the Chargers if any team because I think that team will suit him best. So I would say Josh Sweat. Another name that I think will be quite in an advantage would be Chris Godwin. Now, obviously, 29 years old. Yes, he is also coming off a dislocated ankle injury. He also had a torn ACL prior to this. Um, I think the ankle injury was in 2024 season. But the insane thing is he's still, a freak of nature when you look at Chris Godwin. You look at the fact that Baker Mayfield is Baker Mayfield, but he has Chris Godwin and Mike Williams, and Chris Godwin had the better season than not Mike Williams, sorry. Um, okay, I'm forgetting his name. It's
Mike
fine.
Evans.
Mike Evans. There we go. So when I look at Chris Godwin, I think a guy like that could really fit a team like the Seattle Seahawks, right? A guy that just had Tyler Lockett. Tyler Lockett moves on now. You need another inside receiver that's going to be able to make plays after the catch, but he can also play as an outside receiver like an X or like an X receiver or a Z receiver. And I think Chris Godwin can dominate on that side too. How this dislocated ankle will affect it, we don't know. Obviously, the Seahawks are also looking at a different offense, so we're gonna see how that gels together. But I think Chris Godwin could really fit in for a team like the Seattle Seahawks. One other name that I do want to mention that I think is gonna have quite a hefty effect. Sam Darnold, I'm gonna let you take care of because quarterbacks, you got quarterbacks. I just don't. I hate talking about them. One other name that I think really would be interesting would be DJ Reed coming out of the New York Jets. You look at cornerbacks here. You can talk about Treverius Ward, Carlton Davis. The list goes on, but I think, and you can also talk about linebackers in the sense of Dre Greenlaw, Nick Bolton. Nick Bolton's an interesting one, 25 years old, quite a young guy as well. So you don't know how that's going to go. But I think for me, when you look at a guy like DJ Reed, what stands out is that he's going to be that number two cornerback. If you already have a number one cornerback solidified, getting another cornerback just to keep your defense afloat. And the interesting about DJ Reed for me is he can play anywhere, right? You can put him at the nickel, he can dominate. You can put him at an outside cornerback, he can dominate. He's just kind of an everywhere type of guy. Um, I think the team that he would fit best in, believe it or not, would be SF. I think when you look at the 49ers, what they're trying to do now with the new Robert Saleh defense, obviously DJ Reed, a guy who's played under Robert Saleh, Saleh would know how to use him perfectly. Obviously, Treverius Ward leaving would have an effect, but you never know. The Niners could draft down and then get a guy like Benjamin Morrison or Will Johnson if he falls down to that level, along with DJ Reed pairing. I think would make for the perfect success for what Robert Saleh wants to have in his defense. So DJ Reed to the San Francisco 49ers would be my pick. Again, I'll summarize Josh Sweat to the eventual champions, the Los Angeles Chargers, Chris Godwin to I believe I said the Seattle Seahawks, and then finally, I would go DJ Reed to the San Francisco 49ers. I think these are the names that I feel would be not the biggest names on the NFL like free agency tracker, but I would say these are the names that are going to have the most effect on these particular teams. So that's the way I went about it. I know I kind of changed up the prompt slightly, but that's the way
Right.
I went about it.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I feel like with what you're kind of getting at, I think that um, you mentioned as far as the Chargers having a load of salary cap. For whatever reason, I feel like they're going to be kind of fiscally conservative on it. AP
They will.
government term.
They
Um,
will, though.
but I feel like it's going to be more, they're going to be selective on their free agents. I can very well see a Josh Sweat, but for some reason, I feel like they're going to be more prioritizing kind of solidifying the back end, kind of making, kind of making what's it called? Strengths, even bigger strengths. I think that would be for the secondary. I think that would be
Okay.
for the defensive line, helping guys like Puna Ford, who I think they will retain. We
Yeah.
talked about maybe they could draft a defensive tackle. Um, Later on, you wanted them to draft Deion Walker.
Yeah.
And I think that if you put Deion Walker, Puna Ford, and someone else over there, that could very well be one of the best defensive lines in the game.
Got it
Um,
out.
I
Yeah.
I definitely know that they're going to be in on a receiver. I don't know if it's going to be a big time receiver. I've heard if T. Higgins gets traded, that they would be in. I was really kind of hoping that T. Higgins didn't get franchise tagged because I wanted to talk about him. I had for a long time been saying that a dark horse in getting T. Higgins would have been the Arizona Cardinals, simply because of the fact that he's an ex receiver who's a huge deep threat, and Jonathan Gannon and that Arizona Cardinals offense loves those deep threat X receivers, and they don't really use Marvin Harrison that much. So T. Higgins can be primed for a career year with the Arizona Cardinals if he were to sign there, and play a similar role to what AJ Brown plays for the Eagles or what Michael Pittman plays for the Indianapolis Colts in similar offensive systems. It's a shame that he didn't get put there. But I think that they're the teams that are going to be the most interesting. Your Chargers for sure. I think the teams with the most salary cap, which is going to be the Patriots and the
Hmm.
Carolina Panthers. Um, but I think the two teams that I'm looking at most are the Las Vegas Raiders. Actually, three: the Washington Commanders, the Las Vegas
Mm.
Raiders, and the Minnesota Vikings. Because these are
Okay.
the three teams that are just absolute wild cards because they were the three biggest surprises as far as certain circumstances. The
Sure.
Raiders, I don't think anybody, well, most people expected them to hire a veteran coach of some sort, but I don't think people expected them to go kind of like
Pete Carroll.
all
Yeah.
chips in, we're going to go for a veteran coach with Tom Brady leading the ownership. He's going to be this committed to helping. And now we're, going to go big after free agents, which seems like that's going to be the case. Um,
Yeah.
you talked about
No
DK
doubt.
Metcalf earlier. I think the two teams that I would have said that he would be most interested in, um, according to Rich Eisen, there was a rumor that the Cowboys are not in on any of their free agents, which seems to be that they want to go big fish hunting in the free agency. I don't see that the case, but if there is one team, if there's one player that I would see them going after at this point, it would be DK Metcalf. I don't think that's
No,
going to happen.
Yash. I'll let you continue in just a minute. Charles Barkley had one of the greatest lines in television yesterday. I don't know if you guys saw.
Yes.
He went and said, "All of these people, they just talk about the Lakers. They're second.
Yeah.
They're of no point, right? You should be talking about the Cleveland Cavaliers. Just like that. Why in the world does the media care about the Dallas Cowboys?
I don't. I hate you know I hate the Cowboys, but
No, I know.
the reason I mention that is just because of the fact that Metcalf's previous offensive coordinator was Brian Schottenheimer. So it is, I think it's an interest to be put out there.
Okay, that's interesting. That's a good point.
Now, granted, I don't
They
think the
weren't
Cowboys are going
successful.
to go after this because they've said this multiple off seasons in a row now that they're going to spend big and then they don't do anything. Namely last year, where they said, we're going to go all in, all in. And who did they draft in the first round, remind me, last year?
I can't even tell you.
Tyler Guyton out of Oklahoma. So much
Okay,
for,
hold on.
I'm
Tyler
not,
Guyton
no
was horrible.
discredit to him, but I mean that's not all in if you ask me. If that's your big move of the offseason, right? So
Yeah.
what I'm saying is I think that there are other teams that are better positioned than the Cowboys to do that. One of them being the Raiders. Um, the Raiders are big into big, athletic, deep threat receivers. A guy who's been accustomed to playing um, the in Pete Carroll systems is DK Metcalf, um, which is why I think DK Metcalf, if he's put on the trade block, could end up playing for the Raiders,
Hmm.
fulfilling that Raiders legacy of receivers who hopefully don't disappoint in the case of Metcalf, but we've seen it with Randy Moss, we've seen it
Yep.
with Antonio Brown, even though he never played a game there. Um, Wild, but yeah, I think Metcalf could be the next one in that bunch. And this time he would be with Tom Brady with the Raiders, but it's an interesting kind of thought to put out there. But I also think that they're the most interesting team as far as what they're going to do with the quarterback. They recently cut Gardner Minshew, which means that they're shedding space as far as money goes to go all in for a quarterback. We heard that they were all in on Matthew Stafford recently.
But that
Unfortunately,
doesn't matter now.
right.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, they didn't have the trade compensation like the Giants, who, from what I heard, they had a deal set in place. And It was Stafford who kind of initiated the Rams, hey, I want to stay here. And they came up with an extension and restructured his deal. And that's why he stayed. Otherwise, he could have very much left to go to the Giants, which is an interesting thought to put out there. But now I think the two guys that I'm looking at are Sam Darnold and Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson, obviously, being accustomed with that Pete Carroll connection. But I think from what I've heard, the rumors are that they're going to go all in after Sam Darnold. And I've also heard that the Minnesota Vikings might be in on Sam Darnold as far as extending him to a multi-year contract, which I think is interesting. As far as how much money, I don't know, but I don't buy that for the reason that I think they're going to try to double down on other positions. Obviously, they've been extremely committed to trying to develop JJ McCarthy in spite of his injury and whatnot.
Sure.
But for that reason, I actually thought one of the better fits in this was Milton Williams to the Minnesota Vikings. I think he's a great rotational guy who kind of fits that analytical kind of outlook that GM Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah has. You're talking about a guy who's very good at being a platoon as far as a certain position. He's great at the three technique, one of the best in the league as far as getting sacks from that three technique. And I think that's what Minnesota has been missing as far as their defensive line. They tried to draft, if I'm not mistaken, Andre Carter last year to fill, or a couple years ago to fill that role, and he disappointed. Um, and they've been trying to fill that role with Patrick Jones or kind of off the edge rushers who didn't really fit. I think Milton Williams would be perfect. Then they can focus on the draft and kind of bolster up that defense, which really is a bunch of no names right now. Um, so I
Yeah.
think, Milton Williams would be perfect for a guy like Brian Flores, who's done well with other guys like Zach Sealer, and then Raekwon Davis,
True. It's a
similar
good point, man.
players. So I
Good
think
point.
of all the fits I like, I think that Milton Williams would be great for the Vikings, and I think Sam Darnold, for that reason, would probably go to the Raiders. I would be interested in seeing how Sam Darnold is utilized if he has a guy like DK Metcalf, or if he doesn't. Um, how does that
Sure.
run? But I'm not entirely sure of that fit, just simply put, because Chip Kelly's the offensive coordinator. And Chip Kelly's more of a guy who prefers those kind of statue-like pocket passers. But Darnold does have, pocket
Darnold does
presence.
have that in him.
Right.
I think another point that I'm just going to quickly address is
Hmm.
I think especially if DK would go to the Raiders with Sam Darnold, I think that would be a match made in heaven.
Hmm.
But one thing I would say that they would need to do over the offseason is somehow get a reliable running back. Now they might draft that in Ashton Genty. That could be a pull that they might pull off. I said McMillan in the draft, but I think they could go with an Ashton Genty if they get DK Metcalf. So again, speculation, but who knows?
So, Akhilesh, so as far as this next segment goes, we're going to be each asking a quick question involving trivia as far as the NFL free agency goes. And I got an easy question for you today. I'm going to be a little light to you today.
Okay.
Um, Akhilesh, tell me the year that free agency started.
Okay, let's think about this. So Reggie White was one of the first free agents to ever commit to a team, which would be the Green Bay Packers. They won the championship in 1996. He played 3 years there before they won the championship. So it's either 1992 or 1993. I'm gonna say 93.
Akhilesh, you are correct. The year that
Okay.
free agency first started was March 1st, 1993. And yes, that
Okay.
was the year that Reggie White was an originally free agent. Um, But yeah, I mean, that is my question for today, involving you. You have any questions for me?
All right. Okay. Let's. Hmm.
You better not give me one of those Raiders things like last time. That
No, no,
was
no. I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna do that. Okay. Now, this is not the toughest question because you know the guy's name, but okay. I'm gonna ask this still. Name one NFL quarterback who made a Pro Bowl but never started a game at college.
Made a Pro Bowl but never started a game in college. Oh, yeah. I think isn't this Matt Castle?
Wow,
Yeah.
nice. Yeah, it's Matt Castle. Yeah,
Yeah,
2010 made the Pro Bowl, but he never started a game at college. Wow, that was insane. Nice. That was a good pull.
no, I thought he made the Pro Bowl with the Patriots, but it's always with the Chiefs, right? I think it was 2010, right?
Yeah, 2010 because Brady. So
No,
I
but 2008 Brady was that was the year Brady got hurt. They
Brady
went
got
11 and
hurt. That's
5.
true.
Yeah.
That's true. Actually, he might have. I don't know. Let me search it up.
That's interesting. I don't understand how you make the NFL without playing a single game of college.
I mean, hey, so coaches make it.
That's true. I mean, it's better than Tim Boyle, who like the guy has what, 3 touchdowns and 12
Yes.
interceptions?
So yes, he did make the Pro Bowl with the Kansas City Chiefs, led them to a 10-5 record, 3,100 yards, 27 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. Was sacked only 26 times that year. Comeback Player of the Year was fourth in the Comeback Player of the Year rankings. Had a pretty good season that year, and then
Yeah.
so
I mean, I remember him playing for the Minnesota Vikings, and geez, he was off. I mean, he was
yeah, he was
somehow
off.
better than what they had previously. They had Christian Ponder the 2 years prior.
Oh,
So, I mean, going from Christian Ponder, Matt Castle, I mean, not a great improvement, but I mean, for
I
that
mean, yeah,
time,
he
that's a
went
good,
three and
yeah,
three his first year, went 1-2 his second year there. So
yeah. But that's our trivia segment for today, and then now back to the episode. Well, as far as today's episode goes, I mean, it's a little bit of a shorter episode, but as far as time goes and as far as the free agency, this has been a crazy, like we said, this has been a crazy last few weeks. We thank you guys so much for the support. And as always, please remember to like and subscribe. But thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.